Middle Podcast, the podcast dedicated to the music, movies, and culture of Generation X.
What is up, Slackers, and welcome to the 52nd episode of the Stuck in the Middle podcast. I am your host, Jason Eck, and that's right, 52 episodes. So that means I've been doing this for a year. And boy, what a year it has been. It has been like, I think, so many ups and downs. So tonight's episode is a little bit of a celebration of just having done this, right, for a year. And having some of you who have come back week after week. I always say it. I appreciate it. You're what keeps me going. So I just want to share a little bit kind of about the trajectory of the show. And then I'm going to go a little bit into kind of, I guess, yeah, I did my origin story, which was the first episode. But it didn't go beyond kind of the surface ideas that I had for initially wanting to do this podcast, which was a little bit of nostalgia, reconnecting with old friends, etc. All of that incredibly valid. However, there's a little bit more to it. So this episode is about the show, but also about me as an individual. So for those of you who enjoy the show, at least part of it has got to be because you enjoy something that I do. And so a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, if you will. But it's so interesting to me looking at the statistics every week. So bear in mind, one of the big challenges of all this, and I mention it every week, is I'd love for the podcast to grow. But that actually takes a lot more work than even just recording, editing, writing the copy, posting, right? Doing at least one social media post directly related to that particular episode. And that's about as much as I do. And I've fallen away from posting the video version, although I've recorded every single one after I think episode, maybe 12, where I have all video of everything that I've done. And eventually, I'm going to start putting all of that edited content up on YouTube. But the kind of like behind the scenes stuff that's been so challenging is that I've done relatively little by way of promotion. The people who are really taking off, it's constantly putting out new content, and not just necessarily something about the particular episode. It's about something that is relevant to Gen X, for example, even news stories currently. And I've gone over a few of those, but I just want to share kind of this journey that I've been on and what I'm talking about as far as promotion. So for anyone who doesn't know, if you are a small creator, you don't make money doing podcasting. Okay. So I don't know if I'll ever be able to get guests outside of the people that I know and love, because I can't give them any money to be on the show. So I certainly can't get any guests who require that. Right. And I'm sure there are some who are like, oh, for a small fee, I'll come be on your show. And no, thank you. I'm just a dude in my basement talking about rock bands and bad fashion trends from the 90s. I mean, it ain't that deep, man. It ain't that deep. But I look back at the past year, right, statistically. And back in March of 2022, I had 80 total downloads. Total 80. Okay. And I put up a post this past week because I just crossed 2,000 downloads. Now, Rogan gets that in about 0.5 milliseconds after a new episode drops. Same thing with the guys from Distractable, Impulsive, like all of them. Boom. New content. That's like instant. And they're doing, who knows, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, probably millions, at this particular point in time. So if I look at, like I said, March of 2022, 80 total downloads, and March 2023, 378 downloads. Now that is huge. Huge. So again, it's humbling every time I have one of these months that just kind of explodes, right? And someone's found it and they listen to every episode. So whoever has recently joined up, thank you. There's someone definitely back home in Connecticut. So whoever is listening to this from East Hartford, thank you. And even if you just downloaded everything and you haven't heard this, hey, I'll take it. I'd love for you to listen to it, but it's just so fascinating to see that kind of growth. And certainly over, the Christmas break, it started to take off. And even with the new numbers being in, the mid to high 2s and low 3s, it's like February is a shorter month and it was still, in the 200s. So again, these are very modest and small numbers, and every ad is about 1 cent, maybe. So it's been a lot of work that in and of itself is rewarding. And like I said, the reconnections that I've had with people, So again, I want to thank all of you for listening, but I want to thank the people who've been on the show. So, Justin was on, I think the third episode. So the third episode started with Justin. Justin and I go all the way back to middle school, playing in bands together. And that all went all the way up through our, early 20s. And to reconnect with him, which every few years we do, we definitely did around our 40th birthdays, which is a lot of fun. Same thing with Carlos. Right around the time that we turned 40, we kind of all saw each other again. And then life goes on and just stuff happens and life is busy. So Carlos coming on to a couple of episodes as well, with various different topics. And Carlos was a big part of the podcast starting to take off a little bit. And I'm not just blowing smoke up his ass because I know he listens every week. It's just really those couple of episodes started to go the next level. So having Justin on, okay, great. It's a new podcast. And now, he has guests. Okay, great. So that built a little bit. And then Carlos came on and I was like, great. There's guests. And that moved a little bit more. And then, I had my wife Maggie on and that was really cool. And then I had my brother-in-law, Daniel, come on. Great numbers on that because it was an interesting topic, right? So it's a matter of having the right person at the right time. And then Nicole comes on and we do that Faith No More episode. Again, a little bit more traction because Nicole is West Coast based. The numbers on the West Coast were better. I don't know if that's by happenstance or what have you, but really kind of cool. So the other thing that blows my mind. So again, thank you to all of my guests. I really do appreciate it. And I have some ideas for each and every one of you to have you back on the show. And certainly my brother-in-law, Daniel, and I, along with another one of our friends, we have a really cool one coming up. We just have to get our schedules cleared because we all have kids. We all have jobs. And it's like, okay, depending on the activities that the kids do, it's sometimes difficult to get everyone's schedule kind of aligned. But we have a very, very cool episode coming up, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I'm really jazzed about that one. It's going to be very cool. So sit tight. So the other piece of it is not just seeing the podcast grow, thanks to all of you, but I just want to share this as well. So one of the things on the statistics that comes up is geolocation, right? So let's go by country, okay? So by country, United States, Brazil, India, Philippines, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, Germany, Mexico, Argentina, South Africa. I mean, I could keep going on. And I'm looking here and I have representation from every continent. And that is just so freaking cool. Okay. Yeah, not the, hold on a second. Do I have any there? Hold on. Because there's this picture graph here. And sometimes you got to drill in. Where did it go? Sorry, this is really riveting whenever I'm looking stuff up while I'm on here. Let's see. Do I have, hold on. Okay. So kind of a bummer, but there's no one there. So obviously Antarctica, I don't have anyone there, but I was just thinking that I have Australia. Okay. So yeah, just Antarctica. So all the rest of the continents have been covered. And I think that is really cool because again, I'm just a guy in my basement in kind of a relatively smallish town in Massachusetts, and someone on the other side of the world is listening to me babble my nonsense. That's super, super cool. Like, amazing. And I don't take it for granted every time someone will go ahead and tune in, because that also shows that generationally, you could be someone who is living somewhere on the other side of the world, and they're relatable experiences because there's things that we experience. Like I did the episode of things that I felt were shaping. And since then, I've thought about a few others. The fall of the Berlin Wall was in our lifetime. I mean, that in and of itself is crazy. The end of the USSR and a somewhat open Russia just somehow always ends up being like the big bad in like every movie and every trope and every political campaign. Oh my gosh. It's like Russia, Russia, Russia. And I swear it's all just a script. It's all just a script. Right? But, Russia was somewhat opening up to democratic, capitalist, ideas. And they ended up having, some people become very wealthy via capitalism. And then, the government kind of closed back up again. But nevertheless, it's an amazing thing that we were able to witness happen. And I hadn't really thought about, some of those other pieces. We've also saw the end of apartheid in our lifetime. I mean, South Africa was, not as long as the United States as far as, oppression, but still for a very long time. And I saw an interesting interview with Trevor Noah, who was talking about, that experience and how there are parallels. So he finds certain things relatable, yet people from other African countries have completely different experiences. It's fascinating. But anyway, the fact that I have listeners from all over the globe, men, women, ages, all from like right at the beginning of the cohort of Gen X all the way to the younger ones. Because I can get that information from some of the different statistical places. Anyway, it's pretty rad, and I'm very thankful. So I wanted to get into a little bit of like I said, the behind the scenes. So now I'm going to get a little bit personal. So it's story time, get a little personal. So grab yourself a cup of tea and a warm blanket, and I'll tell you a little bit of behind the scenes stuff. That's just life stuff that has led me to so many pieces of the podcast being a part of it, but also where I'm going to go from here, where I hope to go from here. And I'll need some of your help in order to do that. So let's get back to 2019. So 2019, this is prior to that big old pandemic, right? So in 2019, I am a gym rat. 2 hours, anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours in the gym, few times a week, and just getting after it, right? And shedding weight like I was initially bulking, then I was starting to, to cut, like probably the best shape I've ever been in my life. Because when I was in my teens and 20s, which is supposed to be, your peak physical fitness, I was from a cardiovascular perspective, but I was very, very thin. Super fast metabolism. And then for a while, when I say homeless, just mean I was drifting a little bit. And then I was living at a place. I had a roommate, but I had no money. And basically, I wasn't working for a while. And girls were feeding me, frankly. So I wasn't eating a lot. So I was real thin, partying way too hard. But anyway, 2019, getting jacked. So also in 2019, I ended up finding out something that was kind of so this is a little bit of confessional here, right? This is some heavy stuff. But part of the reason I do the show is that I'm going through all these experiences, right? And kind of flowing through the experiences and being able to talk about them, and it becomes cathartic. And then if anyone who hears this has a relatable experience, I think that's always helpful. Whenever I listen to a podcast or a show or whatever it is, and someone is saying something that I relate to, it just makes you feel a little bit less lonely in the world, right? Like I look at my kids' life and what I've been able to provide along with my wife for them and how different that is for me. It's completely unrelatable to them, what I've experienced. And that's a good thing. But that can be isolating sometimes because even, my wife and I have very different backgrounds, very different families. So in 2019, I decided that I was going to do something that I had to do because there was this kind of nagging thing that existed in my family. So I did 23andMe. So at the top of the show, and anyone knows me, my last name is Ek. That is depending on where you are, Swedish or Finnish if you're on the border, but usually Swedish. And 23andMe came back and I'm like, not at all Swedish. So something that was kind of hinted at, danced around, not really faced head on in a lot of meaningful ways had come to fruition. So it's kind of weird to be in your late 40s and find out affirmatively that your father was really your adopted father, biological mom, adopted father, right? So that is kind of again, I try not to swear too much, but a mind bender, because you establish certain things, even something as a name or an ethnicity, and you tend to relate to that. It becomes a big piece of you. Your name is the most critical piece in some ways, because that's an immediate identifier of who you are. And then when you pair that with, I come from Vikings. Well, that's rad. I'm glad I never got the Mjolnir, tattoo. But that was kind of like this awakening to me of like, holy cow, I'm in my 40s. And now it's not that I'm having a crisis of identity. It was more, okay, this is my name. This is who I am. But elements of who I am have been shifted, right? So that was kind of, it's not something that you necessarily expect to be doing in middle age. You're expecting to really be fully finding your authentic self. So this was a little bit of a left turn, right? So at the same time, and I'm not going to get into this particular story too much because it's a little rough, but let me just say that I had a little bit of a altercation with a family member. And although I consider my position on this to be just, and frankly, my wife considers my position on this to be just, nevertheless, not everyone considered my reasoning to be just in this particular situation. So again, all this is happening in 2019. So I decide, because I've mentioned before, love wrestling. I love wrestling. I always will. It is, depending on how you look at it, the lowest form of entertainment, or it's a great art form. I consider it an amazing art form, and I will always maintain that. Some of the best stories ever told have been told in a wrestling ring. If you don't believe me, you just go ahead and you follow the Mega Powers Explode. Go ahead on the Peacock Network. You watch that bad boy. It is amazing storytelling. Serial episodic television over the course of, I think, a year. Really cool stuff. So I decided that when a new company, so I follow I can't say now I do, but I was at the time following basically everything that was out there I was consuming, because as always, WWE is always my least favored, because of, I've talked about being kind of, punk rock in my mentality. So I always wanted the alternative to the mainstream. WWE is a publicly traded huge corporation. That's never going to be my most favored thing, just by virtue of that's just not my mentality. I'm not a huge corporation guy. That's why I left a huge corporation and got into a nonprofit business. That's just my belief structure. It's who I am. It's how I'm wired. So I'm watching, Ring of Honor. I'm watching New Japan Pro Wrestling. I'm watching Impact Wrestling, various other indies. And this company starts because a billionaire another billionaire, it's always billionaires, decides to launch a company with guys who had promoted the biggest indie wrestling show in history and the largest crowd for a non-WWE show in 20 years. And that was a show called All In. It was promoted by Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks. So they all became the founding fathers of a company called All Elite Wrestling. So when All Elite Wrestling was announced, at the same time, WWE had a developmental product that they called NXT, and they still do. And they decided that they were going to, as soon as AEW announced when their programming was going to be on TNT, originally, now it's on TBS, and WWE put NXT against it. Same time slot, whole thing. So I started podcasting. It was my first foray into podcasting with much like rudimentary equipment to what I use now. And what I have now isn't like phenomenal or anything. It's a basic rig, but it was basically a lapel mic and a laptop, like direct connect in. I wasn't using anything like I do now. I use Spreaker. I use StreamYard. I'm using various different things. I have a whole computer interface. I can also plug my guitar into the interface, which is fun. And I started podcasting in my basement, and I called it WNW, Wednesday Night Wrestling. And I still have all of that information. It's out there somewhere, and I may get back to it at some point. But you're like, wow, that was a long rambling story. Oh, wait, it rambles some more. So I'm churning out week to week, and I'm watching both shows and like taking copious notes and then going ahead, recording, like, and when it's something that's based upon a nightly drop, so both shows were on Wednesday, that means that I need to watch both shows. Sometimes maybe go back and watch some things, then edit, write everything up, then post it, because you want to get it out the next day because it's fresh, because it's based upon, basically a live programming. That is time consuming. And that meant some late nights, because the shows would get out at 10, and sometimes it's like, 12, 1 in the morning. I got to work the next day. So, again, in 2019, somewhere in there was this whole thing with the place that I was working. It was just some weird stuff going on. And here I am. I'm doing the podcast. I'm feeling good about it. And we end up having a pipe rupture in our basement at our old house. And it essentially wipes out the basement. Okay. Wipes out the basement, which is where I record. And when you have a, 3-bedroom ranch with 3 kids, we have 1 bathroom, the basement being a furnished basement was huge, right? So I end up getting so sick over the course of months. Looking back, the fact that no one could figure out what was going on with me and why I was coughing to the point where I would pass out. And I think I mentioned that on the show before. It was likely COVID. And now my doctor looking back goes, yeah, we did not know what was going on with you. We just thought it was pneumonia, but like your lungs were clear, but like we didn't know if it was bacterial. And it's like, great. So I think I had COVID at the end of 19 in December. So now this means I'm sick and trying to get people in to look at the house, to do the basement. And it turns out after we pull everything up, we have to have testing done on the floor, because then, wouldn't you know it, the tile that was under the carpet, the tile that we had no idea was there, was all asbestos. So this needed to all come out. All come out. So then getting that scheduled, because now it's Thanksgiving and you headed into the holidays, into the, Christmas break and all that, and through New Year's, no work was getting done. Like no work was getting done. And I stopped doing the podcast. Like I just did. And I was like sick and I didn't feel good. And then on top of it all, I started a new job January of 2020. January of 2020. In my same industry. But then 2 months later, COVID hits. I'm brand new into this job. Okay. So that's some stuff that's just life stuff. But I was podcasting and then I stopped podcasting. Just, it was. And I had some stuff going on with family and identity and new job, which also is something that you somewhat shift mentally. For a while, I was starting to grow long hair again. I cut all that short, get a new job, got to wear a suit, all that. And still sick through like March. World shut down, but I was considered essential. So I missed like a week in the office. Then we ended up having trouble with the VPN that we were using. And it's like, okay, we were back in the office. And then I was just there. Throughout the whole thing. Right? So that's just what it was. So now things get scary for business. Yet at the same time, like my wife had started with a different company and that was actually starting to go really, really well. So we end up doing the basement ourselves. I had never framed walls before, but we had to relocate. We'd been wanting to relocate a door for years. I'm like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to redo this. I don't know how, but I'm going to do it. So framed out a new wall, new door, moved that. Okay. Got everything done. I had sheetrocked the whole thing ourselves. The only thing I did not do was the taping and the mudding because I do a bad job, but I did the painting myself. I put in all the new lights and we had someone come in and do the drop ceiling because at this point my shoulder was killing me. Right. And we decided that we were going to put the house on the market because we ended up finding the house that we're in now. So that's a lot of change in a very short period of time, but there's more. So somewhere in, I want to say April, right? March or April. So somewhere right at the beginning of the pandemic. So this is where a lot of stuff gets really heavy. Okay. So right at the beginning of the pandemic, my youngest son goes in for some testing. He'd been having some stomach problems for a long time. And I mentioned on the show that I have Crohn's disease. I got diagnosed at 22. I have a regimen now where I've been in remission, just had some recent tests done this past year. Everything looks golden. Knock on wood. Praise the Lord. But my youngest ends up being diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Okay. And the day that we find that out, we also find out that my wife is pregnant. So we had this kind of, oh my gosh, my kid's life might change depending on treatment. But at the same time, we got this good news that we were going to have a baby. Now that was really stressful. We're not spring chickens. And I'm blown away by the people who are starting their families in their 40s. God bless you. Okay. But then obviously, I have mentioned that I have 3 children and we end up losing the baby. And we've been very fortunate in the fact that we were able to conceive very easily. Like, honestly, like, boom. It was like, okay, another kid. So here we are. We're much older, been through a lot of stressors. And this was really hard, like really, really hard. And for anyone who's experienced that, and we have some family who've experienced multiple, it just wasn't something that we were anticipating. It was like, okay, we're going to have another baby. All right, here we go. Rock and roll. And, we've had really up at that time, I was the only one who'd had, losses in my family. So this was a loss for all of us in a really profound way. I think in a lot of ways, I still haven't fully processed it. That was hard, right? So we're just on this roller coaster, good news, bad news, changes, like just everything, just moving. And, my boss says to me, it's like the life of Job. And it sometimes has felt like that, right? So plugging along at the job, but now I am not working out regularly, at this point. I'm on again, off again with nicotine. It is just a thing that I deal with. But then through the pandemic, myself, like so many people, so I've had all these emotions, health issues, losing a baby, my son with Crohn's, I got kids starting high school, another one going, all this stuff. And I was drinking all the time, copious amounts of alcohol, like ridiculous amounts of alcohol. And this continued all through the pandemic and all through, honestly, till 2022. Okay. So trials, tribulations, all that. And I decide, and I'd stopped working out at one point. So I start working out again, right? Quit smoking again, getting back in shape. We have the new house, put in a gym. I have all the equipment that I need, everything I need. Started running, and I was never a runner. And my son and I together signed up to do a 5K, which is like so cool, right? I've been training. He was doing track, so he's distance track. He's like, this is what I do. All right. So we signed up because of this, local charity. It was for Lazarus House, which is a charity in Lawrence, Mass. That is, there's so many things like Lazarus House Ministries. It's like there's like a soup kitchen, like a thrift store, and pregnancy center, like all these kind of things in a relatively economically depressed part of the city. So I go and I do my very first 5K. Now, it's a small group because it's a virtual 5K, right? And you're doing it all live. Like, there's camera set up, right? And all that, because there's like these different apps where, you can plug everything in, and I'm on my treadmill. But it's also a lot of fun. So based upon this group that I had, which these are not elite runners, these are just local people. Like the guy who won was obviously an elite runner and like did it in like no time. But I think like my first one, it was like 30. I don't know. I want to say it was like, I don't want to like make it seem better than it was. I keep wanting to say it was like 36. It was like 36 or 34 minutes, something like that. I don't know. But that night, after I've run this first 5K, feeling really good about myself, and my son comes to me, he goes, Dad, I just found out. Yeah, just found out. He knew about this, but just forgot, right? And we have a thing at school. It's like the football banquet, because he was playing football at the time. He's like, that's tomorrow. I'm like, dude, you're signed up for a 5K. He's like, I can't. I got to go to this thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I ran my first 5K on Saturday and my second 5K on Sunday. Like road to health. Here I am. All systems go, right? Going to get back into massive shape. It's going to be great. And I'm doing like this stretching routine where I'm like insistent that I'm going to be able to do a split. It's splits training. It's an app. And I was doing really great. And I'm running and I'm lifting again. And then I'm like, okay, I need heavier weights. Went and got Olympic barbell equipment, all that, right? So I'm on the road to health. And then somewhere in 2021, my father-in-law is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And for anyone who doesn't know, pancreatic cancer is a bitch. All cancer is. This one's a bad one. It's a bad one. So that ended up being, in many ways, the next year of my wife and her siblings. Now, one of her siblings is back where they are, back home in Nebraska. But there was frequent travel. Now, with 3 kids, it's a lot. And a full-time job and, all that. And it was really difficult, because then we were going through that, right? So just the prior year, we had lost a child, and now here we are. We are not sure what's going to happen with my father-in-law. And I think they were alternating like every 3rd month, something like that. My wife's on a plane. She's flying. Now, mind you, her job is something that she could do remotely. She could do it from anywhere. So sometimes it would just to be there to help. She might be out on the back porch just working. That's fine. But it was a journey. It truly was. And what made it, even more challenging, I think, is, some of that stuff that I mentioned, back from a few years ago, where there was some hard feelings from an altercation and all that. I mean, it lingered. And that was unfortunate because now we needed to all come together and maybe do some healing and focus on the matter at hand, which is, this wonderful man, the patriarch of the family, is in for a hell of a battle. And to quote Norm Macdonald, who says, I hate when they say someone loses their battle with cancer. As far as I know, When you die, the cancer dies too, and I call that a draw. So, again, roller coaster. I'm still drinking a ton. And around September of 21, it starts to get like really, really bad, right? And it's like moving into, end of life care is what it comes down to. So of all the asinine things that I could do, but I'm with the kids, and this might be weeks, and it was a couple weeks, okay, that I'm home with the kids, and I start smoking again. Because it's like, okay, I'm going to smoke because I can't drink as much because I got to deal with these kids. I got to keep them fed. I got to feed the dog. I got to, bring the dog to daycare every morning, like all these kind of things that you don't think about. It's just life, right? It's just life. And, he did pass away in October, and, we all, went and made that trip, and there was, I think, a lot of healing there. Some cathartic things that happened, and some relationships, just even like beyond like anything else, just like families are families. There's all these little different pockets of people that through the years, very, very big family, that have come into various different forms of conflict or disagreement. That's another thing. In all of this, going all the way back from, 18, 19, 20, gosh, going back all the way probably to 2016. I got off social media completely as of 2019. Primary reason, politics. Now, I do, in fact, actually love politics, and I may do a completely separate podcast, but we'll talk about that down the end of this episode. And what was really, really challenging is that people that I consider dear friends, kind of people that when I would see that they were struggling, I would reach out to, saying, hey, anything I can do to help, kind of thing. Like that kind of friend. And this political thing got crazy. Like I said was it 2 weeks ago? I don't care about conspiracy theories. I don't care about I don't care that you have your opinions and all that. Whatever opinion you have, it's yours. I hope that it's informed. I hope that you've done your research, but don't say asinine things that aren't rooted in reality. That bothers me. It does. It does. Now, people might have said some things that I was saying were asinine and defies logic and reason. Fine. So there were some friendships, long-term friendships, that were fractured through this, right? So I'm like, okay, screw that, leave it behind. Gym, okay, people sick, okay. So here we are. We're back in 21, laying my father-in-law to rest, and, life goes on, kind of thing, And, we got through the holidays and it was nice. And, my wife had a kick-ass year at her company, but they ended up being bought out through a merger, of which she was not necessarily loving it, not really loving it, the merger idea, what the new company represented and all that. So in the midst of all this, she decided, and we consulted, that she would open her own P&L based mortgage branch of a company. I'm not going to mention the company because then I got to do the whole MLS number and, I have to do all compliance stuff, because I briefly worked for the company because we were going to do this endeavor together. I was going to do it part-time because doing P&Ls is what I do. And she was going to do like the business part, the mortgage part. So we had a small team. We are in a prime location in our hometown, like prime, beautiful. I helped to design, we had a blank office, blank. We could do anything we want. The only thing that was in that place were the bathrooms. That was the only thing that had been framed out. They sent me the plans and I sat down and I got to work. And I said, okay, this is where office A is going to be. Office B is going to be. This, we're going to have a conference room. This, we're going to do, a mounted TV with a camera so we could do, video conferencing, all that, like, colors, and it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. And thankfully we still have it. But as anyone who knows, the mortgage business has not been particularly great. And then somewhere in all this, I launched the podcast because I need to get these things off my chest. I need to talk about these topics. I need to explore the ability to just get on a microphone and talk, because it was a skill that I used to think I kind of had that I felt that I had lost. However, much of that can be tied to the fact that you drink too much, you get stupid. Period. So, right along the time the business is really just starting to be firmly established. What I mean by that is staffing is settled, HR is settled, all the technology is settled, the build out is done, all the compliance stuff is done. Here we are, ready to roll. Now, I have a very small shop. When I say small shop, that just means a small office for what I do. And it's financial operations. And it's something that is exceedingly difficult to do with one person. However, that is about what I was going to embark upon in 2022 when my only full-time solid employee gives their notice because they got an offer they couldn't refuse. And I saw the offer and what it entails, and it is an offer they could not refuse, and a 7-minute commute from their house as opposed to 30. So here I am. I'm trying to help my wife launch this business. And now I'm going to be completely alone for months. It's going to be months before I could get someone in place. So that in and of itself was a challenge, but I'm still plugging away at the podcast, She's plugging away at the business, but then I have to reduce my role more and more and more. I can't do it. It's too much. It's too stressful. It's all of that. I'm barely getting through doing the recording of the podcast in my regular job, not to mention all the parenting and all that. So that brings us to November of 2022, Thanksgiving. So a good friend of mine who I'm still hoping to get on the show, we have is a Friendsgiving. Because all of our family is not really here. So his mom is still, alive and lives. She has an in-law apartment, right? And she's in her 80s. But other than that, all of our families are, within a couple of hours. And my stepdad, who had been a frequent guest at Thanksgiving, I mentioned got remarried, like different life, and that's okay. But the ritual that we have for Thanksgiving is a bottle of the highest end rum that we've never had before. And over the course of a few hours, we drink that bottle of rum. And he and I have it's one of those friendships where we have completely different, like, political views and completely different family backgrounds, like all of it, right? But the areas that we overlap are awesome. You know what I mean? And we can talk about that stuff without anyone getting offended or mad. And that's just great. And that's like real friendship. So solid, so good. And after that, Thanksgiving evening, the morning, next day, so Friday morning, that Thursday Thanksgiving was the last time that I have had a drop of alcohol. So it is 3 months solid. I go from the mindset of every day at a time, even though I didn't do a 5-step program. It was just, okay, cold turkey, I'm not doing this anymore. But I did some of the steps, which is like really talking to my kids and my wife and trying to make amends and saying, yeah, I have been drinking entirely too much. I have been a functioning alcoholic and it's just too much. And I have to stop because I want to be alive. I want to see my kids go to college. I want to see them get married. I want to walk my daughter down the aisle at her wedding. I mentioned, earlier in the podcast, like my familial relationships and like, my father, so my adopted father. And I do say that now and I shouldn't, but he was the only father I knew for a long time, like except for my, stepdad. But like that was my family. If you're adopted, you're adopted and that's your family. You know what I mean? So I don't mean to diminish like the efforts, but it was not always the best relationship, frankly. But where was I going with that? I'm not sure where I was going with that. Something with my dad. Okay, I know. Because for the longest time where I didn't know genetically for certain, you start thinking about as you're getting older, they always ask you, what health profile do you have? Like what's in your background? And if I were to go with his background, medical history, he died at age 47 from esophageal cancer, most likely from the fact that he drank copious amounts of alcohol and smoked copious amounts of pot. He was a pot farmer. Another reason that kind of not living the same kind of life at all, just very different people with very different sensibilities. I don't judge him for any of it. It was the decisions that he made with his life. But you think about that whole area, your chest, your esophagus, like all of that, like is just being pummeled for like 30 years. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm thinking about mortality more and more as I get older. And I'm like, okay, well, I've made it past 47. I like to make it into like the average life expectancy at least, which is in the 70s. And I have some members of my family who have made it just shy of 100. My great grandmother lived till 99 and my grandmother, her daughter, is in her 80s. My grandfather on that side in his 80s. However, I have no idea anything about my biological father and how the hell he died and why he died in his 60s. Like, what was it? Was it cancer? Was it heart failure? Was it diabetes? Like, what is it? No idea. All I know is I can control what I can control, which is don't drink alcohol, try to eat more healthily, get back to exercise. So this is the journey. And some of what I've looked at, looking at footage of the podcast, like part of the reason that I'm not posting the videos, or even doing as much content that I should be doing, which is like short video clips and reels and all those kind of things, is I'm not comfortable really in my own skin right now. Because part of that process of being fully sober is your brain starts to kind of rewire itself and you start to see things from perspectives and emotions that have been dulled and deadened. And really what you're seeking when you're drinking to that level is to dull and deaden them. Like that's the goal, but it's an endless cycle that doesn't get better, right? It just tends to be a downward spiral. And I'm not talking about 9 Inch Nails, although that will be an episode at one time, and that one will have to be marked explicit. So here I am heading into my 4th month of sobriety, and I've had the podcast go gradually up and up and up. That is a success. Through being sober, my relationship with my wife and my children is so much better, so much easier. Although now that 2 of my kids are dating, one of them now being my daughter with her first kind of courtship going on, that's going to drive me to drink. Oh, he seems like a nice boy. He seems like a nice boy. And I hope that he is a nice boy. Truly, I do. He was over here the other night, getting to know him a little bit, sat down, dinner and all that. But it was hard enough. Like my oldest boy starts dating and, he had his heart broken. Now he's got a good gal now. We met her the other night. So we've met both of the, SOs. Like one of them is more serious, which is my older, it's that they're officially boyfriend and girlfriend. And then my daughter's like, no, we're just dating. We're just hanging out. Yeah. Better be all you're doing. Anyway. So that's been the journey, but the relationships are better. You know, the ability for cognition is so much better. Even though I still will sometimes, forget things. And here is a pro tip for anyone who wears hooded sweatshirts like I do. If it has one of the pockets in the middle, make sure that that's one of the places that you look for your remote control, because it's very possible that you just slid it in there, just, unconsciously. And then you're looking around for the remote going, where's the remote? And it's in your pocket. So what does that all mean? What was this whole little vision quest? Is that, this little journey that we've gone on? What does it all mean? Well, I'll tell you. And this is what I have been pondering and thinking about. Now, maybe one of the things that I'm hoping that some of you have kind of gleaned from this is that when I determine to do something, I tend to do it. It's the only person I want to be super competitive with is myself. I need to challenge myself always. So when I was, adding muscle, that was because I needed to do that. Like I needed to know I could do it. I needed to go ahead and see abs developing, right? Like I had to do that. So here I am. And what are the next steps for the podcast? Well, I want to keep growing this podcast because I love it. And I would really hope to get the big guests. When I say big, I don't know really what that means, even when I say it, but I certainly am hoping that someday I can get an interview with someone that we would all identify as being relatively famous. Like that's the goal, right? But there has to be building blocks there. There has to be providing content that is interesting enough that people are going to be listening to it and maybe sharing it on social media. But it also means that I need to be providing enough content on social media for it to be shared, because you will be buried in an algorithm if you only post once a week. And if you go on to Twitter, any kind of company that it's a media company, they'll post the same freaking thing over and over again because they know that once it's posted, it's gone. Like if it doesn't blow up immediately, you have to keep posting it in order for it to be seen. I don't do that. I post once and I move on. Like, okay, I've done my bit, because I don't want to think of it as work. But if I want to do it as work, I need to do what? Put in the work. So next steps. I've mentioned, just a second ago, I was talking about, putting my face on camera. And part of that was looking so ragged. Part of that from the drinking. Part of it putting all that weight that I had, taken on, taken off. And I just am not completely comfortable in my own skin. And I look at my own face and I go, oh, you old bastard, you. And I know that I have to make some additional changes, right? So I am planning on, and I'm saying planning, I don't know how long it's going to take me. It could take me 2 weeks to initiate this. It could take me a month, but I'm going to put it out there to all of us. I'm doing this podcast at 48 years old. I'll soon be 49. It'll be my last year in my 40s. And I think for many of us, 50 is a huge milestone, positively or negatively, however you look at it. But I have to look at it that I need to accomplish some things and get rolling so that I'm heading into my 50s feeling good and feeling confident, because our generation has been, I said it before, cynical, maybe sometimes a little bit self-defeating in some ways. And there are some people who just, every generation is going to have these go-getters, these over-the-top people. But there's a reason somewhat that I don't shy away from the whole concept of slacker, right? Could I be doing more? Yes, but I don't want to be a CEO who works 24/7, 365. I don't want to do that. If you want to be a billionaire, you have to work 24/7, 365, unless you've come into some family money and you've invested very well. Other than that, you have to put in the work. Now, eventually you get to the point where you don't need to work anymore. But all the ones who get to $1 billion and keep working, it's not just so simple as being like, oh, well, how much money do you need? It's a compulsion to work. It's a compulsion to grow. Like, that's what makes them successful. So I would like to be moderately successful, I think is what it comes down to, as opposed to obscenely successful because of the work that goes into it. I still want to be a husband. I still want to be an engaged father. I still want to take my dogs for walks, which I don't do enough of. Like simple things in life. I want to be able to sit down and binge watch a show or watch a movie or whatever it is, or just sit and talk about things on a podcast. But if I could do a podcast every day of the week, like radio, dude, I would love it. I would absolutely love it. So how do I take these next incremental steps? So part of it is I need to be comfortable with putting my face on camera all the time, for good or bad. This is my face. Like, this is what it is. And I think I'm funny looking. Well, okay. A lot of people are funny looking. Put my face out there and feel comfortable. I guess what I'm trying to get at is all of us should feel comfortable. And if it's a midlife crisis era, which we're in, I think many of us are. Some of you have already gotten through the midlife crisis. Kudos to you. Some of you don't think that you're going to have one. Good for you. Some of you just aren't old enough yet. You're on the cusp. You're about there. But I think once you get into 50, it's literally like 40s are actually technically midlife. If you really, well, I mean, if average life expectancy, let's say it was even 70, I mean, you're at 35, that's midlife. Imagine like thinking that way, right? But I'm certainly on the back nine in the grand scheme of things, right? There is more real estate behind me than ahead of me. So what I need to do is do the things that I've always wanted to do. So part of that is kind of fulfilling a bucket list, but documenting it, because I think it has to be something that not only motivates me, but hopefully motivates others. Because I think that's what we're all here for. Honestly, we've lost so many elements of community, and we go to social media or podcasts or YouTube or whatever it is. So I need to be a part of that. I need to still have a community, right? And if I could do things that can help others, then I need to do that as well. And if I can help myself while helping others, well, gosh, that is a gift. So I'm going to document a few things. So I have an idea for a YouTube series, when I'm not going to spill all the beans on it now, because it's a really great idea. And if any of you are way more motivated than me, I don't want to pop on a YouTube and go, holy shit, they're doing my thing. But it's going to be kind of accomplishing all the things that I've always wanted to, that just haven't. And that's on me. And it can't be on me anymore. Like, I have to own it. I have to own it. And I'm going to document all these things. It's just all the things that even some of the things that I thought I wanted to do and started to do and either failed at or didn't put in the work. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. Even things that you love, no matter what it is, you have to put in the work. I tell my youngest this all the time because he fancies himself someone who's going to play college basketball. I'm like, dude, you need to be out shooting every day. Oh, it's wintertime. I've seen you out in the wintertime shooting. We have a half court. Part of the reason that we bought this house, it's not fully a half court. Okay. It's basically right to the 3-point line. Right. So it's all marked off. Dude, you should be out there constantly working, right? Because Michael Jordan did not become Michael Jordan because he just winged it. The guy shot and he shot and he shot and he shot. Same thing with guys who are transformative, like, Steph Curry. He shot and he shot and he shot. And I tell him the same thing. So all of it is about reps. And you have to put in the reps. You have to put in the time. So my next piece of my journey is going to be threefold. One, I'm going to keep doing this podcast, and I'm going to start adding to the content because it's simply a necessity for success. Number two, I'm going to launch a supplemental YouTube channel, which you have to keep an eye out on that, because that is, it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be an interesting journey. And then finally, I am planning on doing another podcast, and that podcast is going to be hot button issues. It is going to be in that kind of political, philosophical realm from my own point of view. And I will just tell you that my point of view is I've never really met anyone who shares my full vision of what I think the world should be. That includes my wife. I mean, she's my best friend. We agree on so many things, and we're probably more politically aligned than we're not. But there are still some areas where she and I are in absolute disagreement. And by the way, that's really important for everyone. Don't agree with everyone about you know what I mean? Like, I don't care if you're a Democrat. I don't care if you're a Republican. I don't care if you're a Green Party. I don't care if you're a Libertarian. I don't care. Whatever it is that you identify yourself with, don't agree with 100% of any platform. That's insane. Don't do that. So anyway, this podcast with additional content, a supplemental web channel that will be an offshoot of the podcast. I haven't gotten a name for that kind of project yet. I'm thinking about it. And then finally, another podcast that hopefully you won't pop over there and then be like, I don't want to listen to his other podcast anymore, because I'm still the same person. It's just, I'm going to spot my shit is what it comes down to. And I think everyone should be free to do that, honestly. So that's it. That is the buildup of the past couple of years that led me down this path of creating this podcast. I hope I haven't lost any of you through this process, this little bit of a soul purging, but I needed to do it and kind of give you a glimpse behind the person and how I've come to this point and how I've gotten through it, right? Because I think that every single person has something valuable to give. And even if one person listens to this and takes something out of it and goes, man, thank you for saying that, that's great. But in order for me to know that, I do have to hear from you. And I know I'm a broken record, and I say it every week. You can email me at stuckinthemiddlepod@yahoo.com. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube at StuckPodX. You can head over to the Facebook page at Stuck in the Middle, a Gen X podcast page. You can, if you would be so kind, leave 5-star reviews, comment, like, share, and most importantly, please subscribe to the podcast. So until next time, later, slackers.